audience and our panelists. I mean, Trinidad and Tobago is a small country. We should speak more to each other. So on that note, I would like to kick off our panel discussion by referencing an article in today's Express by Mr. Curtis Williams titled "Embird Admits Things Not as Rosy as 2022." And the article would have gone on to say that Finance Minister Colin Embird has admitted that as a result of declining energy prices, the economic outlook for 2023 is not as good as it was in 2022. I would like to ask Mr. 𝚂𝚎𝚅𝚑 to give us his views on the Minister of Finance's pronouncement that things are not as rosy as 2022. So over to you, 𝚂𝚅𝚅.
Thank you very much, Lisa. And your team and of course, all the viewers online. You know, this is a very prestigious program. You know, we built up quite a following. And also to a co-presenter, the esteemed attorney at law, 𝗘𝗖𝗢𝗌𝚘𝚗. Now, just as before I get to Colin Burt's continuous flip-flopping on where we are at in terms of turning the corner, rounding the bend, or on a merry-go-round regarding the economy, I want to just make the statement in that if it's not measured, it's not managed. The main issue with the economy is we have not returned to pre-COVID levels. And pre-COVID levels, meaning the beginning of 2020. We have to also bear in mind that by June 2020, at the beginning of the pandemic, total joblessness in Trinidad and Tobago, in terms of NIB, the NIB report, would have fallen. Total employment would have fallen by 112,000 plus persons. 112,800 less contributors to the NIB in June 2020 as compared to June 2015, which should have been the last data point available by NIB for the Kamala Persaud government. So the record of this government to even the beginning of the pandemic, before the pandemic, was atrocious in terms of access to employment. Foreign direct investment fell by $10 billion. The economy was already in the doldrums. Last year, you had the central bank rebounded by some 4%, but it's not a rebound by 4%. They are still at least 5% less. So they've not even been able to return to 2019 levels. So it's still a significant way in the doldrums beyond, so it's below pre-COVID levels. The worst year in terms of economic performance would have been the first year of the pandemic, all right? And despite having the highest price of crude oil in a decade and a half, despite enjoying prices for natural gas, because we don't use Henry Hub again, we use the JKM, the Japan Korea marker, and we use NBP, which is a UK marker, and some other benchmarks in the Western Europe and Northern African market space that we sell to. You have the price of gas reaching as high as over $30 per MMBTU. It's down to about $14, $15 now. So, and a budgeted price at $6. So net back, once you're getting our net back price, we're good. So you have a situation in the country where the price of gas that we are enjoying is the highest it has ever been. The price of oil for the last year is the highest it has ever been for the past 15 years. Yet, except for a temporary spike in April 2011, I think it was. Yet, this government is coming to the population and saying things in 2023 are not looking as rosy. The reality is the government has been basically watching. They have not been acting. They benefited from a catastrophe in Eastern Europe regarding the the aggression or the economic fallout based on the war between Russia and Ukraine, and that resulted in higher prices in the commodities as well as higher prices in terms of the urea, ammonia, methanol, petrochemicals. So you got a boom, but the boom is based on the deaths of thousands of citizens of other countries. The government put nothing in place in the 7.5 years that they've been in office to kickstart economic activity. So you have a scenario where the government is making, but the economy is in the doldrums. So that's the issue that you're facing. The economy is not doing well. And as a result of that, once the price of oil, gas, and these petrochemicals start to normalize, okay, you can't stay at a high forever. The war will not rage forever. The markets of the world will not remain fixed to the demand supply lost in Eastern Europe forever. The government sat on their hands for 7.5 years and blamed Kamala Prasad Bissessar for 7.5 years. And what you're seeing now is the result of bad governance. Make no mistake, the PNM does very well at politicking. You understand? So they engage in good politics, but bad governance. So the optics might work in their favor to be the first past the post at an election, but in terms of the economics, it doesn't redound to the benefit of the citizens. And what is the result of that? You have a scenario where the food prices have increased 14%, and citizens are still living on salaries of 10 years ago. You have joblessness abounding. You have prices because of course they removed the subsidy, for fuel and lubricants rising by as much as 35%. Cost of transportation by 14-15%. And these are things that citizens need when you get your salary and you are paying $100 more to travel to work, $500 more to purchase groceries for your family. These things are real costs. And now you're going to add to that the increase in the price of electricity. So what the Minister of Finance said is no surprise to us. In fact, the budget surplus that he boasted of for last year is not a real surplus, because they're not paid VAT refunds in the tune of billions. They're owing companies like MTS, who provides security for school children in the schools across the country. They have state entities owing T&TEC hundreds of millions of dollars. So you have the government riding the balance sheet of service providers, not honoring bills, okay, cutting subsidies left, right, and center, and deferring loan payments. They deferred hundreds of millions of dollars in loan payments. So you defer loan payments, you're not paying businessmen their VAT, you're not paying service providers like MTS and T&TEC and so on, and then you're claiming that you made a surplus. That is what they call creative accounting. So, and just for the persons who are interested in how that can happen, the way in which we calculate our national finances is done on a cash basis. So if the government incur certain debts, the debts may accrue on an accrual basis, but in effect, once they don't pay it, they can claim a profit. They can claim a surplus. So the effect, to draw a very basic example, is as if a father, he's worked for the month, he earned $10,000, his bills were $15,000. He simply didn't pay them. So he didn't pay the school bill, he didn't pay the tax, school, he didn't pay electricity, he didn't, and then he declares to his wife, you know, this month you made a profit of $2,000, but you only made 10,000. Your true cost is 15,000. You just decided not to pay $7,000 this month. The bills are still there to be paid. Okay, so that is the so-called surplus. It's a fake surplus, and it arises from the government's disdain for best practices in government. All right, so I mean, I think I will leave it there because it's not an economic lecture, but I just want persons to recognize what they are seeing now is as a result of a government that was inactive. We've been telling them every year, the leader of the opposition has been saying it, that under her government, $50 billion, 48 billion TT dollars in foreign direct investment, net flows came into our shores. Under this government, in the first 5 years, 10 billion left. Okay, so companies have been leaving. Whether it's 𝗧𝗛𝚒𝚘 that has cost T&TEC $1 billion in terms of lost revenue, or whether it's the government closing down Petrotrin, causing a lot of companies to disinvest in Trinidad for the country. And if the business model is weak, the people who feel the pain are the citizens in jobs, business closures, and lack of economic activity.
Thank you, Mr. Obika. And as we move to Mr. Taknal Singh, good evening, Mr. Taknal Singh. We saw you and your colleague, Dr. Arjun, put together a piece entitled A Shock to the System. And before I ask you, let me just congratulate you for putting together that piece and asking pertinent questions to the RIC, because as I saw, that piece was submitted to the RIC. And let me just congratulate you on that. But can you give us an idea what this piece is entails?
Sure, thank you very much, and good night, everybody. Good night to my fellow panelists, my good friend Tahaka, Lisha, everybody, all your viewers. I often look at this show and I'm very impressed with the quality of the contributions that come from here. So Valmiki and I essentially decided, and let me just say that Dr. Arjun was really the progenitor behind that project. As you would see, and I'm sure most of us could figure out, a lot of it is economic analysis. And a lot of it, I have to credit to Dr. Arjun for really putting things in a way that formally addresses or formally causes the RIC to address these matters frontally. You see, one of the things with consultation, and while it is all good for us to be activists and go to the consultations and let our voices be heard, one of the important things with consultation is also the written submissions. Oftentimes, and I've been involved in several challenges to a consultation process and to decisions generally by public bodies. And one of the things that the courts tend to look at is what is written before them, or what written representations are made to the body. So in the event, and I'm not saying that it will happen, but in the event that there's any type of legal challenge or political challenge, at least there is reference to a document which captures a lot of the concerns that citizens have been raising. And a lot of those points have been raised by the activists attending the consultations. A lot of it came, I remember actually, I went back to look at one of the videos that Archie was streaming for a contribution, both by Anil and Marsha, and I was melding in some points there, Marsha Walker and Anna Roberts. So what we needed to do and what I felt was important was to capture those representations in a document and submit it formally to the RIC so that they consider it. You see, because one of the problems I have with this entire process is the consultation that the RIC is purporting to undertake. In reality, it's not really a consultation, and that is one of the things that I wanted to point out, or you could say was my contribution to the document, the flaws in the consultation process. Consultation has to be understood in the context of two things. One, it is a democratic process. It is indispensable to any democracy that public bodies, the government, the executive, properly consult and solicit the views of its citizens on any issue. Here we have a RIC Act which sets up a body called the Regulated Industry Commission, which has a statutory duty to consult. So the law recognizes not only as a general principle, but that this body must engage in consultation And the law says that, look, if you decide to engage in consultation, you must engage in consultation lawfully. And democracy embraces that principle. I often make the point that it's often misunderstood in history, in the history of mankind. People think that we came from these societies with kings and queens and autocracy and then evolved into democracy. But if you really study history, you would understand that the earliest societies made decisions by actually consulting its citizens or its members of society. There's a beautiful book on that called The Rise and Fall of Democracy, which anybody could look at, and you see that. And those are the kind of principles which we must embrace. It's not too far removed at all. We have to understand that. Now, the law requires consultation to be done in specific ways. The law recognizes, and I think I heard Mr. Rambali on our previous program here go through what is called the gunning principles of consultation. The gunning principles of consultation are essentially this. And when I call out the factors, I think automatically it would ring in everyone's mind whether or not the RIC is actually undertaking a lawful process. The first thing with consultation is that proposals are still at a formative stage. That is the first principle to consultation. So where you have proposals that are being made for implementation, they must still be at a formative stage in order for you to consider proper consultation. Here we have a draft determination which already has conclusions. So how on earth could one really consider that to be a formative stage in the development of policy? That is absolutely wrong. The second thing that you have to consider is that there is sufficient information to give intelligent consideration. One of the points that a lot of the activists have raised, and I think MP Padarat actually raised this, he pointed out that, look, you have these proposals being generated on faulty data, faulty CSO data. I know, Taka, you would probably know a lot about that. The CSO data that they're basing these calculations on is far dated. I think it was about 10 years ago was the last time, or 5 years ago, that they actually collected this data in order to come up with this proposal. So clearly the information is flawed. The other issue is, the other limb of proper consultation is that there is adequate time for consideration and response. Well, it can't be that you have such a large and complex document being published sometime in January. You're prepared to close consultation intermittently across Carnival and across different aspects, religious holidays, etc. Close it within a 2-month period to consult on such a complex topic and important topic. And then you've already said, and I'll get to that, you've already said that, look, new rates are going to come sometime in, I think it's May or something like that, or June that they're looking at. And then the fourth limb is perhaps the most important. Conscientious consideration must be given to the representations that are made in the consultative process. Can we really say that the RIC, who has already determined, because they've already stated that new rates are going to come, can we really say that they're going to have conscientious consideration to any of the things that are being said in consultation? One of the points I make in the paper is that consultation is not simply allowing people a venue to vent. If you want that, pay a psychologist. That is not what consultation is for. Consultation is for the decision maker to genuinely solicit the views of citizens, views of both the common man and learned academics, such as my friend Tahaka. Listen to what they have to say and conscientiously decide whether the views and the opinions that they are getting are worth taking on board, are worth dispensing, or you can modify them and implement them. Can we really say that that process is afoot with these RIC consultations? And I think the answer is an astounding no. The other issue which I raise, of course, is that you have to look at, and it might be a technical issue legally, but it's one that I am willing to explore. You have the consultation process being undertaken essentially by the executive directors. If you study the RIC Act, you would see that the RIC sets up a structure. It's an org chart. The decision makers are not the executive directors. They're really just functionaries. We have a concept of a board. You may have sat on a RHA board or some other board, where you have directors that run the show. They take the corporate decisions. But in the RIC, it is actually the commissioners who have quasi-judicial power. And they sit at the top of the organization and they take the decisions. So if the commissioners are the decision makers and the ones that have to formulate and frame this policy, then why aren't they getting down into the consultations, coming down, meeting the people, and understanding firsthand what people are saying in relation to your draft document? That is the way you consult. There are many things, and I think with Zoom and other electronic platforms, we've all learned that there are certain intonations in voice, there are certain reactions, there are certain interactions that you only benefit from through touch, through personal interaction, as opposed to simply reading a document, which seems to be the plan. The commissioner is simply just going to read what people have to say and take it on board. And two, you're not actually getting to interact with the commissioners by having them question and answer. And the commissioners may wish to ask for points of clarification that they can't ordinarily get. So the entire system and process of consultation that has been embarked upon by the RIC, in my respectful view, is not only flawed, it is self-defeating. It is not going to produce the document and the policy that is going to benefit society, or more importantly, satiate the public that they've had their say in this policy. Even if it goes against you, even if these rates are raised, at least there is some quelling of discontent by the population that they have had their say, they've attended, they have voiced their frustrations, people have listened to them, but for some other purely technical or economic reasons, you couldn't get everything that you wanted, but at least you participated in the process. And that is the essence of democracy, and that is the essence of the rule of law, to which we all ascribe and we must all aspire. And essentially, that is why I decided with Dr. Arjun to put my views forward, because I feel strongly about these types of issues. And I felt that we needed to formalize it and we needed to get it in, because there was a very short period for written submissions. And as soon as I saw it, I said, look, I called them up. I said, listen, you are someone who could deal with the economic part. I'm someone who could deal with the legal part. And, I try to dabble a bit. I take some lectures from Obika often on these economic policies. So I learn a lot from him. So I thought I'd try my hand as well on that issue and see if we could get this documented as soon as possible.
Mr. Th@Singh, I saw on your piece where the RIC mentioned that they are unable to fulfill their role as T&TEC is state-owned. Now, the RIC, that's their purpose. They have been in existence for 23 years. And how is it that they are not able to function this way?
So we have to take that in context. And let me just pull up the act here, right? The problem with the RIC, is that they're not fulfilling their role as a regulator. And that must mean something. When you say you're a regulator, it means that you have to actually regulate the industry. And by regulating the industry, what you're doing, let me just open the act here 1 second. Right, regulating the industry, you have to actually understand who are your service providers and what are your powers in relation to the service provider. So T&TEC is a service provider. You have to regulate the service provider, but in order to do so, you must understand your powers. We often hear horror tales and stories about wastage and inefficiencies in T&TEC. You hear these horror stories, and I don't know if they're true, but you hear that there are certain level of employees that make well beyond what a market rate would pay for those services. You hear about certain inefficiencies in the cost of things for polls, for other ancillary services by T&TEC. So how do we know that the service provider is operating efficiently, giving you cost efficiency, which would eventually redound and affect the prices that people pay per unit for electricity? So let's look at the act. The act at section 6.1, and this is what it says. The commission may have and exercise such functions, powers, and duties as are imposed on it by the act, and in particular, and we have to look at C, ensure, not only monitor, look at the wording of the statute, ensure as far as reasonably practicable that the service provided by a service provider is operating under prudent and efficient management. D, carry out studies of efficiency and economy of the operation and of performance by the service providers and publish the results thereof. So if T&TEC is a service provider and it's an unkept secret that the population knows that there are inefficiencies in T&TEC, and I mean, I think the population perhaps ranks T&TEC as the better service provider, but it's no real accolade when your competitor is WASA, right? Not a big light of the situation. But we know that there are inefficiencies in T&TEC. So is the RIC performing its statutory function as a regulator by getting into T&TEC, studying it, looking for the inefficiencies that are there or not there, or debunking the myths about efficiencies, and then making recommendations so that T&TEC can fix those things? What are the major inefficiencies that has been pointed out? And I think 𝚪𝚏 mentioned it. Is your debt collection? That is an efficiency. If your company cannot collect its debts or is lethargic in collecting monies owed to it, then you are going to have inefficiencies. You're going to have cost overruns. You're going to have credit interest rates imposed upon you because you're going to have to borrow money or whatever to fulfill these things. You're going to be owing people money. And I have sued T&TEC for regular persons who have provided services to T&TEC. And every time you sue and you get a judgment against T&TEC or WASA, you have compounded on that interest and legal costs. So all of those things are added expenses because T&TEC isn't getting its money on time to fulfill its obligations and debts. And that is what I mean when I say that the RIC is not regulating T&TEC as it should. Now, that could come from many things. It could be because of intentional government underfunding. We woke up today about the specter. We woke up today with the specter of the comments by the Director of Public Prosecution, which is another hot topic, where the DPP is essentially saying, look, I don't have prosecutors and the criminal justice system is falling. That is a plea, or that is a complaint which squarely falls on underfunding and under-resourcing. Is T&TEC similarly suffering, I wouldn't say under-resourcing, but is it that they are suffering from direct policy decisions being made about T&TEC that prevents it from operating efficiently? And is the system now falling because of that? Because the RIC, is not being properly funded and cannot regulate the industry properly. And those are the questions that have to be asked and the RIC needs to answer. So the RIC should really be concentrating and telling people who come to the consultation why they have not studied T&TEC. Where is the published report that you have powers to do? You have powers to make and study T&TEC to determine if they are operating optimally. And if they are not, then you have to deal with that problem before you pass the money, pass the expense on to the regular consumer.
I want to bring in Mr. Obika into this, back into the conversation. Now, you mentioned something earlier on about the service providers not being paid by the government. What steps is the government taking to ensure that service providers are paid in a timely manner in the future? Do we know that as yet? Do we have information like that?
Well, the reality is, and thanks, Chris, for the question. The reality is the issue that you're faced with is even beyond that, especially when you consider a lot of these, it's himself. So the government is not paying T&TEC, and the service provider in case, the errand service provider in this case, in many cases, are state enterprises. So you have ministries, you have state agencies, statutory authorities. So, I mean, if the problem is in-house, then it could be that it's a tacit policy to decide not to pay, all right? I just want to piggyback on a point that the goodly legal luminary raised, which is it had to do with the need for data, all right?
Right.
The last household budgetary survey done by the Central Statistical Office was 2008-2009, done over a 2-year period. So you're talking about data that is needed to understand the income and the consumption patterns of households across the country being 14 years old, all right? Mm-hmm. The last survey of living conditions was done in 2014. So again, COVID would have disrupted some of this, but just as the policymakers will need to wait for the budgetary surveys happening right now, and they've merged the two, the budgetary survey and the survey of living conditions. The survey of living conditions really tests for poverty levels, which is very important. And is also very important to appreciate what exactly persons will be paying, all right? Because in the context of the economics of electricity, all right? In secondary school, there was a subject, I didn't have the pleasure of doing it, but there's a subject on the CXC syllabus, I believe, called home economics, all right? The cost to citizens at the lowest tier right now, if you're using up to 400 units, is $104, all right? The proposed increase will bring it to $152 for the first 400 units. So that is an increase of roughly 50%, is a 46% increase, right? Then you have the second tier, okay? So the second tier will carry up to 1,000 units, 600 more units. The total bill today will be $296, so less than $300. It's a very important price marker because there are subsidies and incentives that kick in once your bill comes in below $300, right? But right now, they are going to cause that increase to $446. There's a 50.7, a 51%. You're paying $150 more, all right? The government should have considered that access to electricity be viewed as a human right, especially for persons at the lower end of the economic spectrum. This would especially be evident in the need for electricity use for school children, all right? There are many families that have children growing up in households where they don't have electricity, far as the internet, so that they can access and do their homework and so on, and create a safe space for them to come home to, all right? The average citizen will be called upon to pay $150 more at the lower end of the electricity usage every bill cycle, all right? Why is this important? This last survey of the last household budgetary survey, 2009, showed that in certain parts of Trinidad, the average household income, all right, was significantly low, all right? And then there are two components that they look at the household income and the average consumption. So in Mayaro, which is the lowest level, the household expenditure and consumption was just about $5,000, $5,093. Okay, the highest being Digomat. So you have persons in rural communities. Point Fortin's average was just about 5,800. So you have persons in these communities, and why Mayaro and Point Fortin is important is because the unemployment level in these places is about 15% perennially. All right. 1 in every 7 persons unemployed, and that is men. That's overall. When you look at youth unemployment, it is higher. When you look at unemployment with women, it is high as well. So when they go down in different categories. Why are these things important? The government is proposing a one-size-fits-all across the board increase. Okay, there's no consideration for even the data that would have been in the household budgetary survey. When they asked, when persons raised the question at one of the consultations in Center of Excellence, I was astonished to hear the presenter from the RIS state that they do not consider the state of the economy in the consideration. You know, I'm not sure if he really meant that, but it was difficult to appreciate that you could be raising the rates that will affect every aspect of our activity. Our civilization is based on electricity access. And he is saying that they're not considering that. And they could have waited. The budgetary survey is being done right now as we speak. Okay? There are enumerators going around the households. They could simply wait. And why they need to wait is because at that time, and I'll end this part on this point, at that time, the contribution in terms of the money that, like the 5,000 that they spend in Mayaro, the 28,700 is spending mass and consumption expenditure, 26.5% of that. Most of that spent on basic things, shelter, which is housing, water, increase that cost. Where do you take it out from to balance your consumption? But your salary is not going up by the 50% that they're raising the electricity rate. Where do you take from? You see, you can't take from certain things. So you'll take from health, which is only 4% of your expenditure. So you'll find persons who may have squeezed in a little insurance policy will have to forget that because they need to keep the lights on. Education, which is only 1.1% at that time. Now remember, GATE was in effect. This government has rolled back on GATE. They have closed down access to scholarships. They've taken away the laptop subsidy. They've removed a lot of these subsidies for education and for healthcare by taking away CDAP medication. So persons are already having to spend more on these things. There's not much disposable income left. So with the RIC not taking into consideration the living conditions of citizens, where 47% of the T&TEC customers, okay, pay less than $300. Okay, that's 47%, which means these are people who manage their usage and who may not be able to afford to pay more. So to me, it is callous, it is reckless that they could decide to consider rate increase without considering the conditions that citizens live in.
So I want to warn the panelists because I have a bit of a controversial question that I want to ask. And I see the discussion being a very level-headed, factual. There's statistics being presented. There's reasoning behind what you're saying. But is this because you said earlier on, Mr. Obika, that the government is good at playing politics? Is this just another one of their games? And I say that, and I'm asking that because we saw this with Petrotrin, where the workers were the villains. Quite recently, Dr. Rowley said on the most recent platform meeting that he alluded to the UNC messaging being almost the reason for school fights. And he made a connection there, if I'm not mistaken. I also listened to a few PNM apologists speaking, and they're saying that the UNC is coming to these RIC meetings and almost bullying the RIC. When we listen to persons there, and it's not just UNC senators or MPs or whoever, they're average citizens, Trinidad and Tobago concerned, apolitical persons. Do you think this is just one of another way they're just trying to politicize this, play politics?
Well, I mean, I think I would want to defer the substantive response to that question to the attorney, but I would say this too. I wonder and I suspect, and this is why I'm saying I want to defer to Mr. Takla. I suspect that they're just trying to tick in a legal box so that they don't run afoul of the law when they decide to raise the rates on persons. But of course, they are attempting to play the politics, but I wish them well.
Okay,
citizens of reach the end of their rope, So in the bank, when I went to the transaction this week, and he was saying, how do you think the politics looking? I said, well, people voted the last time on optics, They voted the last time on the politics of the day. I say, but what people are feeling, and there's one point I want to raise before I defer to Mr. Takla regarding what the government is attempting to do regarding the consultation process, if it's politics or not, is we have to consider that what is at the heart of this? What has caused T&TEC to be making a $1 billion shortfall in income? Apart from the efficiency issue, efficiency would only account for 10% of the revenue loss, right? You still need to find about $700 million, $800 million to cover your cost, okay? What is really accounting for it? At the heart of it is the issue with the subsidy for gas. So the government has decided and the Joint Select Committee of the 12th Parliament, where T&TEC appeared in the Parliament, the Joint Select Committee, which is a bipartisan committee made up of persons from the 9 independent benches. For each independent senator, it constitutes an individual independent bench. So the 9 independent benches, the opposition benches, and the government benches. So you have 3 sections, all participating in this Joint Select Committee. And the recommendation of the Joint Select Committee was that the government resource the Ministry of Public Utilities to fund T&TEC properly to the extent in which they can cover their obligations to NGC regarding the gas, because I think it's $1 billion roughly, TT, that is spent on gas annually on average for the past 7 years. So what we are witnessing is the government deciding maybe to ignore the Joint Select Committee and deciding not to subsidize the citizens of this country who all use electricity, okay? But that shouldn't come as a shock, because this is the same government that removed the subsidy all but in fuel and took away the subsidy in terms of adding back VAT on over 7,000 basic food items and so on. So this is a government that is not in favor of subsidies, because as far as they are concerned, the subsidies benefit too many. Not everybody has a building on the corner of Park and Henry Street to earn $45 million rent-free without a tenant in it. But that is the PNM's way of subsidizing the wealthy. You know, this really comes down to that question. Is the government interested in subsidizing the citizens of the country? And if they were, they would find the $1 billion where they built it.
Okay, if I may come in now, I know it's only 8:45, but oh my God, this is an incredibly good program. I have to commend you all, Mr. Obika and Kyle. I wanted to get up and clap, honestly. I couldn't contain myself. When you both were speaking, I wanted to jump up and clap. It's such a powerful program, right? I'm seeing Adina with her hand up, but there's one question I want to ask. And before we even get into that question, right now we have a little over 200 people who are live across on our social media platforms. So this goes to show you all that what we are discussing here really is important to the masses, right? 𝚑𝚗𝚗, you mentioned electricity is a human right. And I want the audience to pay attention to that. Electricity is a human right. Failure to provide affordable electricity to all is a violation of human rights. Now, I want to put this question to both 𝚑𝚗𝚗 and Kyle. Had the United National Congress been the government right now, and Kamala Persad-Bissessar been the Prime Minister, what would they have done differently with respect to this rate increase? So either one of you all could take that question.
So let me just put 2 points in that would point it. Feed-in tariff, 3 points. Feed-in tariff, focus on renewables and investment in terms of that sector, as well as reducing the need for reducing the energy consumption by other creative means. The last point first. The whole issue of LED bulbs and more energy saving bulbs was something that was already part of the plan when we demitted office. This government took it for a more political gimmick, you know, but really and truly, it is something that needs to be done in a more systematic way and focus to help reduce energy demand. The second thing, because the whole issue is if you have a shortage of gas as well on the overall economy, but you have to continue giving us a percentage of electricity production. If you can reduce the demand, have more revenue for the country to export and benefit from these wonderful high prices that you're getting in Asia and Europe right now for natural gas. The feed-in tariff policy is something that was brought to a certain level when we left office, and this government has not supported the technocrats at the Ministry of Energy in terms of rolling this out. What is the feed-in tariff? The feed-in tariff will allow, once supported, of course, by infrastructural support by the government, will allow citizens to generate electricity, whether it's on a commercial basis, whether it's on a residential basis, and to cover, it may not cover heavy appliances in the household, but it may at least cover maybe the lights and certain lighter, smaller appliances. And that way, you have an opportunity to reduce the demand for electricity across the board in a gradual way. And then, of course, a focus on renewables. The cost may outweigh the benefits in the short term for renewables, but what you'll have is a increasing benefit from reducing your demand for natural gas. This government, when they came into office, like many of the projects, they put a hard stop to it because they stop and check who in the program, check the credentials, take persons out, and so on. And then it took a while before things get back on stream. And so they have been in office 8 years. There's no progress on the feed-in tariff. There's no real progress in terms of a focus on renewables, except the hard work of the technocrats side, the Ministry of Energy, with little or no support from the government. And then they've reduced the focus on energy saving appliances and bulbs and so on to a political gimmick with the bulbs, the 4 bulbs that were celebrated. So the challenge is you have a government that caricatures policy as opposed to really tries to focus on it because they're not governance driven. But I want to defer to my esteemed legal colleague at this point regarding the question that you asked about what we would have done differently, as well as the prior question from Chris Hussein.
Yeah, all right. So I feel a little uncomfortable that Tahaka is asking me to advocate. I'm sure he would have drafted many of the policies that the UNC are going to implement when they when they win the next election. So I would really give him that sort of preeminence. What I would say, let's take the 2 questions separately. In terms of UNC policy, I think I could say confidently that what the UNC would have brought to this entire question is competence, good governance, and proper procedure with respect to the consultation process. You see, essentially, when you have a proper process, it leads to better decision making. And that's the issue. Taka spoke about one of the aspects of raising the electricity rates. He said that, look, it's going to create immense hardship for many sectors of society, many levels of persons in the society. But one of the other things you have to look at it, because you have to take a panoptic view of an economy. An economy has many moving parts. It has many components. They're interlocking, they're symbiotic. You can't simply, and that's why the document that we published is entitled A Shock to the System. You can't take one part and say that we're going to apply standard principles to this. We're not going to subsidize. We're going to let this thing reign free market. Yet you and Taka mentioned it, yet you're going to delay in VAT refunds. So the same business that has to now pay increased T&TEC rates because you are applying liberal market forces and liberal market policy is the same business that is being starved of its VAT refunds, and it can't optimize, it can't reinvest, and it can't earn the level of profits that you want. So it's either you go free market or you go heavily subsidized. It's either you go capitalist or you go command economy. And if it is you decide that you want to tinker in the way you have to, that the way that they're doing, you have to do it fairly. So what you have to consider when you raise T&TEC rates, it's not only that, look, we're trying to meet the expenses of T&TEC, and T&TEC can't survive if the rates don't go up. You also have to consider, and it's a quite proper and relevant consideration for you to take into account, firstly, the hardship, the enormous hardship that people are going to suffer. But on the other end of the spectrum, what about your competitiveness as an economy? One of the things you have to understand as an economy is that one of your primary goals is to attract investors into the country. How are you going to attract investors if you already have a horrible crime rate? You already have labor laws, antiquated labor laws. You're already very low on the rule of law index. And now the one thing that was attracting investors, which was very cheap or low energy prices, you're going to be sending up. And I think Dr. Arjun made the comparison in our document where he says, well, look, yes, some of our Caribbean neighbors, their T&TEC rates, their electricity rates are much higher. But when you look at places like Guyana and Suriname, they are now deepening their energy sector and their rates are going to be competitive, if not lower than Trinidad very soon. So you may very well find that a lot of investors and a lot of businesses would be migrating from Trinidad to these other countries to our detriment, because you lose jobs, you lose taxes, you lose the other benefits of having a strong and vibrant business sector. So you have to think about the economy in a panoptic way, in considering all of the factors before you make a decision. And that is why the data points that you bring into the equation are very important. 𝚪𝚏 spoke about, well, you have very outdated CSO data. That is horrific to know that it's over 10 years and that is what you're predicating your decisions on. But then why can't the RIC engage in its own study? The central bank does its own study when it has to come up with inflation rates. It looks at a basket of goods and comes up with the inflation, the average prices to determine what are your inflation rates. Why can't the RIC consider doing its own independent study? This is how independent bodies ought to react to these types of challenges and ought to perform its functions. But if you're not doing it, then we're really on the pathway to doom and gloom. In relation to the question posed by I think it was Chris, yeah, with respect to politics, well, I don't venture too much into the politics, only to say that my view is, I'm not sure it's politics. It would be very stupid politics for you to say that I'm going to raise electricity rates as a political strategy. I think you're going to get the backlash of our electorate for that. But what I want to say is that it seems to me to be just pure sheer incompetence and poor governance. I don't think they have a clue. My own assessment of this entire scenario, along with other aspects of governance by the current administration, whether it be the way they administrate the Attorney General's office, the DPP's office, all other independent institutions, it is sheer incompetence. I don't even want to put evil, because evil people are usually evil geniuses. It is sheer incompetence, a lack of foresight, a lack of will, a lack of ability to just sit down and do hard work and come up with the solutions that are required, specifically in this context, with respect to how do we determine the electricity rate? What are the things we're going to do? I mean, are we even having discussions about alternative energy? Is our legislation updated to feed into the power grid efficiently those who want to generate alternative energy? Those are questions that we have to ask. Have we ever explored it? We don't know. We won't ever know because of a very, very myopic view of this entire situation. So to answer the political question, I hope it's not politics. I don't think it's politics because it would be a very stupid political move in my assessment, but far be it for me to say what is politically astute or not. But I do say that I think the purely bad approach that both the RIC and the government and T&TEC for that matter are taking on this issue is symptomatic of inefficiency and a very, very lethargic system that is not reacting real time to the economic needs of our population.
Thank you, Kyle.
I hope I answered both there.
I have to say again, guys, I think this is such an excellent program. Excellent program. And I take no credit for it. I'm giving the credit to both of you guys. Some really, really good content here, man. Okay, now in the interest of time, I think we could probably go across to the open mic and QA session, right? It's now 8:56. So Nadina, please go ahead.
Hi, good evening, everyone. I would like to say a special good evening to 𝚪𝚏 𝚤𝚑𝚑 and the new honorary economist, 𝗪𝚪𝚒𝚘𝚗𝚟. But I want to bring back to the table the question of dated information. And I wouldn't even go into the analytical and other bias that brings to the table. But one of the girls, Shahanta, I think is her name, or Shanta, actually asked, did the RIC run afoul of its legislative responsibilities? And I would like to say, even in that regard, it has. because, and allow me just to read this, please. According to section 67(3)(c) of the RIC Act, the Commission shall have regard to the ability of consumers to pay rates. That to me is very, very clear on the role of the RIC and what it's supposed to be doing when it comes to assessing rates in electricity rates in Trinidad and Tobago, or even water rates in Trinidad and Tobago, given that WASA falls under its purview. And the use of 2008, 2009 data as embodied in the draft determination and as the 2014, 2015 data that Dawn Calendar spoke to at several of the public consultation. In fact, I mean, is at variance from that particular requirement of the RIC when it comes to fulfilling its responsibility. The second part is that Section 67(c)(g) goes on to state that the Commission shall again have regard to the rate of inflation in the economy for any preceding period as considered appropriate. So what is appropriate? But what is rather curious in the draft document is that the RIC has paid significant attention to the inflationary impact on the revenue stream of T&TEC, where it actually puts in a formula, RPI minus X, which increases the rates on an annual basis. But curiously, goes on to state in its draft document on page 187 that the RIC has not, and hear me, not considered the broader impact on inflation as it, and this is where it pertains to specifically to consumers, has not considered it on the broader impact on inflation, as data to conduct this analysis was not available when this document was prepared. When it when it came to that subsection dealing with the welfare of households and consumers. So what I want to raise here today is the imbalance in the handling of the two key stakeholders, T&TEC as one key stakeholder and the consumer as the other. The RIC paid significant attention when it comes to the impact of inflation on T&TEC, and I want to repeat that, and disregarded it completely when it came to the consumers. And I want to leave that on the table as being very dangerous in my mind. Now, a final point, Leash, and I want to put this out to 𝚑𝚑 in particular. There are two types of inflation three types that are driven into the economy: cost push, demand pull, and imported inflation. Cost push inflation is one of the most difficult type of inflation to manage because you cannot draw back and reduce demand or use fiscal measures to bring those type of inflation back down. It's very, very extremely difficult. And as Mr. Beaker would know, that type of inflation tends to follow what is an S-shaped curve. I don't want to get into the economics of it, but it starts off slow and then steepens and then plateaus off. We are not aware what is the inflationary cycle or the period for that inflation, that increase in prices to cycle through the economy. If, based on my estimation, that cycle extends to somewhere like 18 months to cycle through the total economy of Trinidad of any singular rate increase, and you have an RPI minus X factor increase in electricity rates within a 12-month period, the type of inflation you'll be generating as one inflation level meets the other at its steepest point can become very frightening. And that is the point I was trying to make at our last presentation. But I want to leave that there and put it out to the panelists, and both Kyle and 𝚑𝚑 if they have any comments on what I just mentioned. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Edina.
Thanks, thanks, Nina, for that mini masterclass in microeconomics, because the reality is we didn't do anecdotal checks with electricity beyond internally beyond. I can't account for what Dr. 𝗏𝗒𝚗 𝗲𝗔𝗛 would have done, because I'm sure he would have done. He would have had access to much more data, notwithstanding the fact that the household survey hasn't been done as yet. In terms of the supply use tables and the impact of increase in cost to the prices of commodities in the market. But we did check some basic distributors and supermarket operators and so on, and they indicated that they're simply going to apply the percentages forward. It's as simple as that. Nobody is absorbing costs for the government. So the government is increasing. If they increase the rates by 65%, they're going to treat with that. So I'll give an example. When the price of fuel went up, we checked with some distributors, and what they indicated is it would result in a 3% to 5% increase in the price of their goods. Now, the 5% is not warranted. It's really what we wanted, maybe a 2 to 3%. But what will end up happening is they would cater for what Nadina said, the expected increase in other things. So for instance, the price of fuel has gone up. The direct cost to their fleet might be 2%, 1.5%. But then what's going to happen is the employees are going to be coming down a little harder in terms of how much money they want for transportation allowance. All right. So and so, for example, the distributors, the persons going and sell and so on, they're not going to say, well, the price of gas increased by X%, I'm just going to take X%. They're going to take X% plus. All right. So by the time you work through the direct and the indirect cost effects regarding the cost increase in fuel, you will end up with 3 to 5% price rises in commodities. Now, 3 to 5% may not feel like much, but that is still $100 more on your bill, as much as $100 more on your bill if you're spending $2,000 roughly a month in food for something as innocuous as price of gas, you know. This is not the weather patterns changing the cost of inputs in manufacturing. This is just the price. The price of electricity going up, food price is going to take a further hit. And once food prices take a hit, you're going to have much more aggressive a push by the organized labor movement, although they've seemed to not find their voice in the face of this government that bullies everyone. The latest target of this government is MP Rodney Charles. Right? The vile attack that the Prime Minister meted out to him on the last PNM meeting, unwarranted and insults by no other than the head of government. So to answer your question, economics of it, we don't have the empirics, of course, but anecdotally, in certain sectors, at least the sectors that impact food prices, which will impact households immediately, we're going to expect an increase automatically once the price of electricity goes up. So this is also going to affect as well rent, where the rent caters for electricity. If the rent doesn't cater for electricity, well, then you will find the store owners may decide to raise their rates of the goods that they're selling. So is it going to be a general price increase? Some people will claim they're going to absorb it, but they may still have to pay for it along the way. Hopefully when we get the data from CS, so we can try to get some more answers to it. Nadina made a comment regarding the VAT intake, 12.5%. Of course, again, so the prices, we're going to say have a progressive increase in prices, and you can't expect persons to say, okay, that's only increased by 1%, so we'll only apply a 1% increase. No, it doesn't work like that. What they will say is, we were absorbing price increases before, and we're going to go up by 5% or more, depending. So it's something we have to monitor. Hopefully we don't have to. Hopefully the RSC is convinced otherwise. Hopefully the government finds the $1 billion to subsidize T&TEC. Otherwise, we'll be here in the opposition to ensure that the persons who are affected, which is the national public, are aware as to what would be the damage to their pockets and their bank accounts.
Did you have any input to make in response to Nadina?
I mean, she's absolutely right in terms of I wouldn't look at it purely as a statutory duty. I would say it's a legal duty, because all public bodies have a duty to act reasonably, rationally, fairly, and in accordance with their statutory provision. So certainly it is a statutory provision that one of the imperative considerations for the RIC is the ability of the ratepayer to meet the expenses of the service provider, to meet the rate of the service provider. Certainly in coming to that analysis, one of the critical things you have to do is to understand inflationary pressures. What are the issues affecting the cost, and what is the ability of the ratepayer to make these improved payments? So if you're not doing these studies and you're not acquiring the data, then you really can't come to an intelligible decision. So I agree with that. And I will leave the cost push inflation analysis to Tahaka.
Okay, Ramdev, I know you wanted to make a contribution.
Okay, good evening all. I just wanted to go back to the question Lisha was asking, what would the UNC done differently, and put in my 2 cents on that. Now, I think you may be suggesting that you have a continuance of a UNC government. And if that is the case, you will still have the policies of 2010, 2015 flowing. You would listen to all what we call the plans of the then government for the crude poles and the green economy and the blue economy. Petrotrin would have been functional. Point Lisas would have been about 80% capacity. Crime rate would have been down. Sure, we would have foreign direct investment. Exploration would have been taking place. Negotiations, pay would have been completed. Food prices, transportation prices, gas prices would have been down. And sure, the government would have paid NGC their money. So it would not be the need to really raise the price, hike the price by IRIC may not have arisen. And that is the point I wanted.
Thank you, Ramdev. Well, Tahaka, look, somebody to pull on your campaign.
Yes, of course.
Is there someone to pull on your campaign? Okay.
Right, but I want to just buttress a point. I just want to buttress a point that Ramdev made basically from the Joint Select Committee in the 12th Parliament, which is the current Parliament. T&TEC observed an annual loss, and it was a result of many things, including the closure of plants on the Point Lisas industrial estate. All right, you have to remember that this government precipitated an exodus in Point Lisas by the Prime Minister, meddling in the negotiations with the gas majors, the energy majors, the upstreamers, when he went on that trip to Texas. And as a result of that, they realized losses of $60 million annually. And this is just with Point Lisas estate, the loss and the exodus that happened there. So you have to understand, when this government is basically deindustrializing the country in a gradual process, like a death by 1,000 cuts, and T&TEC is latest fatality. One fatality before was Lake Asphalt, where we had to see the men from Lake Asphalt on their knees praying for the Prime Minister to pay them their salary. Because when you close down Petrotrin, one of the outputs of the fractional distillation process in Petrotrin was needed as a necessary input into Lake Asphalt. I think that's the whole issue with the bitumen shortage. Well, the bitumen not being available again locally. So they killed one company that is necessary for road paving, and they're still saying that Petrotrin was a lost leader. Petrotrin was a burden on the state. But Petrotrin was not a burden on the state. They were contributing to the coffers. And if anything at all, they were a lost leader where they subsidized a lot of the output that they sent to many of the main producers in the country. So we have a government that simply is bad for governance. It's bad, and the T&TEC story is yet another victim of 8 years of the Keith-Rowley government.
Okay, so I see Trinity Bone with his hand up. Maybe we could take that as the last contribution. Trini, go ahead.
Good night, ladies and gentlemen. Again, I'd like to congratulate the team on an excellent program, and both speakers tonight, my good friends, 𝚪𝚏 and Kyle, on excellent pronouncements on the issues. I'd like to continue too from Mr. Ramdeo and his campaigning. The governance styles of the PNM and the UNC are totally opposite. The PNM is focused on exactly what Dr. Rowley told us on his first interview when he won elections. He wanted to make the rich richer. In that interview with Ms. Ligor, he said he wants to make the rich richer and the poor, and he fumbled his way through trying to find words, will have to make sacrifices and wait on opportunities to get from the rich, the trickle-down economics. Mr. Robert Reich from the US government, Congress, told us on many occasions that model does not work, that economic model doesn't work, and Nadina expounded on that on the last show that we had, and many economists expounded on it. It does not work. When you give the rich money, they make investments in property and abroad and so on. They don't make investments in people, in holistic development of a country. And the PNM and their finances have always done that. If we look at the kind of development that took place in Trinidad historically, for the first 30 years when PNM was in power, we went through 2 oil booms and we were bankrupt, but the rich got richer and all the poor remained poor. If we look at all the different communities, the rural communities, the development and the infrastructure that took place, it wasn't there. And getting back to the point about what would the UNC do differently, the UNC and the Kamla Prasad PP government showed us between 2010 and 2015 that there would be development, holistic development of the country, improving the infrastructure holistically throughout the entire country, establishing communication links, roads, bridges, and so on, advancement in agriculture, and so on. So the lower income people in the communities benefited significantly from the PP government. The opposite happens with the PNM. The rich always get richer and the poor are left to pay for it. And that is what this RIC is all about. They are looking to cut and shave monies to pay their bills. for us to feel the effects of a change in the economy. We have not seen 18 months since the gas price changed. So we still notice, you see it on Facebook where people complaining that the price, last week they paid so much for potatoes and this week they're paying a little more and next week they expect to pay a little more and so on. We have not seen a full cycle for what the gas price did to us. We have not seen a complete cycle for what the change in import prices have done because of the COVID and so on. We are only just beginning to see the effects of those prices in that economic cycle, the inflation rate. Now, I read somewhere, I might be wrong, 𝚪𝚗, you might be able to correct me, or Kyle, because he seems to be an economic expert now. I read somewhere that the inflation rate presently is 8.7. Now, if it is 8.7 now, and you are doing projections from 2009, you said the last time T&TEC, their data is from 2009, I believe you said, 𝚪𝚗. The inflation rate at that time was not 8.7. It is 8.7 now. And when they did their projections from that 2009 inflation, which would have been lower than 8.7, when they did their projections from that, they determined, and it was said in Tobago, that 400,000 households fall below what they consider vulnerable consumers, consumers that need rebates that they would treat special and they would have them apply for a rebate. If you are saying 400,000 people, households are below your vulnerable people, that means if there's 2 people in a household, there are 800,000 people, citizens in this country, living technically as vulnerable citizens. And you are going to increase rates for them after they get another inflation that you did not take into consideration. 800,000 people is 2/3 of our population. And I believe we have more than 2/3 presently who are deserving to be considered as vulnerable citizens.
Okay, Tony, thank you. Thank you so much. So I'm just doing a quick time check here. It's 9:21, so I think we're in a good position maybe to take some closing remarks and wrap up. So perhaps I could start with 𝚪𝚗 first in response to Trinity Bone's contribution and any closing remarks you may have, please.
Okay, well, he was spot on regarding 2 things. One is the UNC's approach to governance, in that our approach to governance is to level the playing field as best as we can, all right, in a pragmatic way. So it's not about following any ideology that is foreign to Trinidad and Tobago. It's really just doing what is best in the national interest for all the citizens of the country, so that we can make everyone's tomorrow better than their today's. And that's is as simple as that in all these spheres, whether it's health, infrastructure, education, and access to shelter and opportunity. Now, you made a point regarding inflation, and it's correct, it's 8.7, 8.6, thereabout, as of October last year. But then food price inflation is 14%. You know, and that is galloping in certain aspects. And the reality of a government that doesn't seem to understand their responsibility to protect citizens, it shows in the fact that they're cutting all these social programs. Now, that said, I'll revert to the point I made at the beginning. In the next election, the choice would be optics over governance. You know, how it looks versus how you feel. You know, and how you feel, not in terms of what the chain up that they give you on the political platform, but how you feel when you face the supermarket, how you feel when you fill out your school list for your child and you want to buy school books, how you feel when you go to the hospital and they give you the prescription and you can't afford it because you've cut CDAP medication, how you feel on the real issues. And once we reset the focus to how citizens feel based on governance. Just to thank everyone for this program. And Chris, yourself, Lisha, is an excellent program, and all your viewers. I want to close on this. I remember speaking to, I grew up in NJAC, so I remember speaking to Winston Dukran when he came to NJAC at the time when we were doing the anti-smelter protest. Mind you, part of T&TEC's problem came with the arrangements surrounding the Alutrin smelter. So just remember that, which was something that was wholly against the best wishes of the citizens of Trinidad and Tobago under the Patrick Manning government. So the problems with Petro-Trin with Malcolm Jones and T&TEC with the Alutrin all were in a ANC-led government and that had to try to out those fires. And I'll close on this because I want to draw a parallel to what you are doing, is that us and all in the 1960s and all across the country, there were groups like this that focused on the issues of the day. You would have young people on the street corners, the young fellas who now on the street corners, they were there focusing on informing themselves